So LSU football has had a really bad habit all season long, and for the most part, they've been able to win in spite of it. But they are going to have to break that habit this weekend against Alabama if they want to win. What is that habit? And does Brian Kelly know how to break it? We'll get into that, plus so much more on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, we're on YouTube as well. So if you'd like to listen to the podcast while you're on the go, in your car, while you have your AirPods in, your headphones in, then great. But if you're just hanging out and you want to watch the podcast, you can do that on YouTube as well. But I also want to let you know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. My name is Caroline Fenton. I am your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU. I've been covering LSU football for years now, and I now am a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee. But there's been a really uncomfortable habit that LSU football has had all season long, and it's driven me crazy, and it's probably driven you crazy as well, and it has costed LSU games earlier in the season, and they've been able to overcome it and get some big wins throughout the season. So what is that habit exactly? And what exactly is driving me so crazy, and probably you too? It's the slow starts. And it's what cost LSU the Florida State game, in addition to special teams woes, in addition to penalties. But that was something that I noticed against Florida State it was a slow start in the fourth quarter. They were trying to come back, weren't able to come back. But if they were able to just play all four quarters like they did in the fourth quarter, LSU probably would have won that game. We saw it against Mississippi State. The first half wasn't great offensively from LSU, and they come back. They're able to completely shut Will Rogers down. They're able to score on, 3 of the 4 possessions in the second half. We saw it against Auburn. We saw LSU get down 17-0, and they were able to turn things around offensively, and they were able to limit what Robbie Ashford did. We saw it against Ole Miss. We saw LSU get down 17-3, and then all of a sudden, a switch just flipped. Like the defense took another step up, the offense took another step up. Jaden Daniels went to the next level. We've seen it all season long, that LSU digs themselves in a hole, and they're able to get out of it for the most part. Now you could say, well, that's a great sign for LSU that they're able to overcome all of this adversity, that they never think about how bad they're down or how far behind they might be, that they still play with their heart out. I know, I hear that. That's a very glass half full way of looking at it. But the way that I look at it is you're not going to beat the Alabamas on your schedule if you are down 17-0. Ole Miss was a really good team that LSU was able to beat. Florida, Auburn, Mississippi State, all of these SEC teams that LSU has been able to get a win against despite falling behind early, those are all good teams, but none are as good as Alabama is. So LSU cannot afford to get down 17-0, 17-3, 14-0, whatever it might be, and expect to dig themselves out of that hole. Alabama is just too good. So what is Brian Kelly doing about it? He was asked about that in his Monday press conference. On the defensive side of the ball, how can Brian Kelly get his team to start playing faster, to start playing harder, faster, and start being that shutdown defense that we've seen later in games from the very beginning? And this was Brian Kelly on Monday.
So what is your preparation for that defense to get prepared mentally?
So that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, you got the $1 million question today. We're trying to figure that out, right? Do we, we all look at things that I need to do in terms of preparation for our players. What I started doing about 3 weeks ago is I moved up some articulation or some contact, 11-on-11 contact from when it would be 45 minutes into practice. I moved it up into the first 20 minutes of practice to kind of heighten that and get our guys ready immediately when they come out to practice that, hey, we need to get after it. We need to be ready right away to build that in. Now, that's only been a couple of weeks, so we're trying to build that in. We're trying to look at some quizzes before, on Saturday morning and making sure that we're sharp mentally. So we're looking at all those things to make sure. And sometimes it's just you got to go make a play. Let's make that catch. Let's make that play and get off to a good start.
So there you go. That was Brian Kelly on Monday. And he brings up two different elements of the game, physically and mentally. So is it a physical thing that LSU just needs a little bit of time to warm up? Okay, well, you move a contact period, an 11-on-11 period, to the very beginning of practice. So it's almost like your body knows, okay, once I get out on the field, it's go time. There's no time for warming up, for stretching, for dilly-dallying. Once those pads are on, once you're on the field, once the pads start cracking, it's on. So they have addressed the physical side of it. Is it a physical lag that's stopping LSU from getting going in the first quarter? They've tried the mental thing. Is it their brains just aren't turned on yet, that they need a little bit of time mentally to warm up? Okay, so the quizzes, the morning of games, Friday nights. So to keep your brain fresh and to be mentally stimulated and to make sure that you are on mentally from the time you get out there. Well, okay, that's something that they addressed is, okay, quizzes. How can we get those juices flowing? How can we get your brain almost conditioned to be like, okay, these quizzes, these questions, we need to get our things moving and it's time. It's go time. So Brian Kelly addressed both of those things. But he mentions at the very end of that clip, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what the issue is. I'm not in that locker room. I don't know what the conversations are on the sideline. I don't know if it's a mental issue. I don't know if it's a physical issue. I don't know if it's a little bit of both. But I have a theory. And that theory is that this team wakes up whenever big plays are made. And you can try all you want to be mentally stimulated, and they probably are. I don't doubt that this team isn't 100% ready to go mentally and physically whenever they get out on the field. But I think we've seen a trend that they start to turn things around once big plays are made. Look at Auburn. LSU was down 17-0. And I was starting to get a little bit nervous, not too nervous, because at that point, I think we had started to see that this truly was a second half team. But when did things start to change? The scoop and score. Whenever Robbie Ashford was strip sacked and LSU's defense was able to recover and score, LSU got on the board. They got things moving. They cut Auburn's lead to 10, and the whole team kind of woke up. What did we see against Ole Miss? LSU was down 17-3. The offense wasn't able to get a lot of things moving. The defense wasn't able to stop Ole Miss. When did the momentum start to shift? When Joe Fouché intercepted Jackson Dart in the end zone, and then LSU was able to take possession and score on that possession. That's what this team thrives off of, is big defensive plays and big turnovers. So when Brian Kelly is asked about how do you get the defense prepared and ready to start fast, it's a very fair question. And I think it's a question that we're all wondering. But I think the key here is you can take all the quizzes you want. You can move all of the contact periods to the first 15 minutes of practice. These guys can be 100% ready and juiced and ready to go, from the second that they walk out of the tunnel. But I think what we've seen is this team thrives off of momentum. Preparation is important, but it's all about the in-game momentum. What did we see against Tennessee? From the very first second of the game, LSU lost all of its momentum when Jack Besh fumbled the opening kickoff. And they weren't able to get any big plays to gain momentum. So what's the key here? What's the key to starting fast against Alabama, which is what you're going to have to do to beat Alabama, is come out the gates fast. You're going to have to create turnovers. And the defense is going to have to come up with really big plays. Because that's what we've seen, is this team thrives off of momentum. So what does that look like? That looks like early 3-and-outs against this Alabama offense. That looks like creating turnovers, whether that's it's strip sacking Bryce Young, whether that's intercepting Bryce Young, whether that's, forcing fumbles for whoever the ball carrier is. That's the key to starting fast, in my opinion, just based off of what I've seen from this team. I think that's the key to starting fast. That's the defense coming up with big plays and the offense being able to capitalize off of them, whether that's turnovers, the offense being able to score off of that, whether that's forcing 3-and-outs and this defense really getting into its groove and understanding what it has to do to stop Bryce Young, to stop Jahmyr Gibbs, to stop this Alabama offense. Big plays, and it has to happen fast, and it has to happen very quickly within the game, because they may get to a point where the big plays may happen, but it's just too late to overcome it. So I think that's one way that LSU could win this game is forcing turnovers and limiting Alabama's offense, big defensive plays early and big defensive plays fast, because the momentum just keeps rolling from there. But there's a totally different element to this game, beyond the X's and O's, beyond the on-the-field play, that I think really comes into play when you play good teams like Alabama, but especially this Alabama team. And I want to get into exactly what that is coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Simply Safe. Because if you've been putting off finding a security system for your home, or if you've been researching the best ways to keep your home and your family safe, then listen up, because right now, Locked On LSU listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. I mean, what a steal. This is their biggest offer of the year, so take advantage of it. You do not want to miss it. Here is why I love it. Simply Safe has people 24/7, agents monitoring your home who are able to answer your questions or tend to your calls at all hours of the day, any day of the week. And that's the best thing for me, is that I know that whether it's early in the morning or late at night or even in the middle of the day, I know that Simply Safe has me covered. 24/7 agents will answer the call for you. They've got tech support staff. So if it's, as extreme as you think that there might be an intruder outside of your home, or if you just have a question, or if something's not working right, they will be there to take care of you and to make sure that you have what you need with your Simply Safe security system. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify that the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. So that's those 24/7 monitoring agents will make sure that you are taken care of. So don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system that I recommend, and you can get it 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege today. This is their biggest discount of the year, so do not wait. That's simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege. There is no safe like Simply Safe. Well, thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen today. Hey, make sure that you check us out on YouTube. You can subscribe to the Locked On LSU YouTube channel. So if you like the content, you get notified as soon as Locked On LSU content drops. So for your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today. It's available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So I mentioned how there's an element to this game, to beating Alabama, and it's really every game on the rest of LSU's schedule, and that's starting fast, offensively and defensively. Even Keishawn Boutte was asked about how the offense can get moving quicker, and he said it's the same kind of thing. It's the quizzes that Brian Kelly has been giving out throughout the week, on Friday nights, on Saturday mornings. And he said, hey, it's just getting moving fast and getting moving quick. It's on the offensive side of the ball, and it's on the defensive side of the ball. But I think that there's another element to beating Alabama and really beating any elite team on your schedule. But Alabama falls into that category. And that's a very mental aspect of the game. Because I think that is something that it's not just a LSU team, just sports in general. That whenever you have life in general, whenever you have a really difficult task in front of you, it can be so easy to overthink it. And there's so many aspects to that of, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed at this really difficult task in front of me, which this LSU team could be thinking of is, oh my gosh, it's Alabama. oh my gosh, this team that has had our number the past 10 years. And now we, with the high stakes and, what's on the line of control of the SEC West, all of that on the line, a packed house, sold out Tiger Stadium, a lot of that can get to you and kind of get the jitters, you kind of get the yips a little bit. Or the mental aspect of, we got this, we're a better team, and you could overlook them. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think that football is such a mental sport, especially with games like Alabama on your schedule, games that have been traditionally and historically the most important and the most difficult games that LSU has had to play. I also think the mental element of the game is something that Nick Saban does so well. And he prepares his team so well. He prepares his team physically, prepares his team for the game plan that they go in to the game feeling prepared on the field. But I also think that Nick Saban does such a wonderful job of getting his team prepared, keeping his team humble, and that his teams always go into any game, for the most part, understanding that, hey, we're the better team. We got to go out there and execute and get the job done. And it's just business as usual. That's what Nick Saban teams are. That's what his teams do so well. I think there are a few different mental elements to this game. First and foremost, I think there's the Eli Ricks mental element of it. And I don't know how much this team really looks into that, whether that's a revenge factor, which could be a good thing, whether that's we don't want to embarrass ourselves against our former teammate. But Brian Kelly was asked about the Eli Ricks effect. And is that going to be kind of playing with their emotions? Is that going to be on their mind? Is Eli Ricks going to motivate them either in a positive way, or is it going to hold them back and keep them anxious? This was Brian Kelly on the quote unquote Eli Ricks mental effect that this team could have going in and playing their former opponent, or their former teammate rather.
Coach Saban say he wanted Elias Ricks to have a good game, play well, but not get caught up in the fact he's going up against his old team and all that stuff. From your perspective, do you talk to your players about that kind of stuff and staying in the game and not getting caught up in the next teammate, going up against them?
I didn't talk about that specifically. They know him. Certainly he was here. Our guys are so much more focused on what they need to do and how they need to play more than any former relationships that they've had with players, to be quite frank. And I'm sure Coach Saban is the same way. This is much more about being in the right emotional zone when you play the game and being locked in and focused. So our guys hear that from me all the time, and I'm pretty certain that that's how it's going to be played.
And I was so glad to hear Brian Kelly say that, because honestly, before Jacques Doucet asked that question, of course, Eli Ricks was on my mind about, how the element of the kind of the dynamic of that would work. But I never thought about it through that lens of how the players would respond to playing against their former teammates. So I was glad that Jacques Doucet brought that up. But I was so glad that Brian Kelly addressed it that way, that, hey, look, they know him. They know very well that he will be coming back to Tiger Stadium for the first time since leaving LSU. They are fully aware. They probably had relationships with him, or even if they didn't. He doesn't matter. He's not important. It's not about Eli Ricks. It's not about the history of him at LSU or the history of the relationships that he may have had with some of the current players. It's not about Eli Ricks. There's a much bigger task at hand. There's a much bigger challenge. And if these players are too concerned about the cattiness or the revenge or the anxiousness of seeing Eli Ricks again, then you're going to lose. You have to be in the right mental headspace going into this game. So I was glad that Brian Kelly addressed it that way, to say, hey, look, they know he's coming in, but we've got bigger fish to fry. We've got way more important things at hand. So my next question is, do the players feel that way? I know Brian Kelly says that that's the message to the team, but do they feel that way? Is there going to be a certain, anxiety that's hanging over their heads? And Brian Kelly addressed that again in his press conference on Thursday. This was Brian Kelly.
Said you didn't want them to put too much pressure on themselves with Alabama. Did they do a good job of that this week?
Yeah, I think they did. The preparation has been really good. I think, what I saw maybe, a little bit at the end of practice yesterday was, Coach, we need to get playing here. This is a lot, and I think they're anxious, they're excited, and I don't mean anxious in terms of nervous. I think they're excited about playing Alabama. I think there's a lot of respect for them. They know they're a really good football team. I mean, they know that this has been a one-sided series. I think they've won one game in the last 10 years against them. So that's the fact. But they're excited about this opportunity to play a program that has been consistently the best or measured as the best in the country.
So there's a couple things on that. One thing that I appreciated hearing and one thing that made me just a little bit nervous. The first thing that I liked hearing that from Brian Kelly was that they are ready to play. That he uses the word anxious and not in a negative way, but like they're just anxious to get out there, that they're anxious to get playing, that they were off for a week in the bye week. And they are just ready to get out there, ready to get the pads popping, ready to show off what they can do. I like hearing that they're going to be coming out of the tunnel just ready to go, that they're going to line up at the line of scrimmage and be ready to battle. So that was a good thing, that this team is ready to go, that they're not intimidated, that they are rested up, and they are kind of chomping at the bit to get out there. Now, the thing that I didn't like was the fact that Brian Kelly said, they are excited to take on one of the best teams in college football. They're excited to take on a team that LSU has only beaten once in the last 10 years. I don't want this team to be thinking about that. This team doesn't need to be thinking about how Alabama has been, in recent history, the best program in college football. I don't need them to be thinking about how LSU's only beaten Alabama once in the last 10 years. None of that matters. 2019 and 2011, that doesn't matter to me anymore. Alabama's championships that they've won over Nick Saban, those are irrelevant on Saturday. Whenever Alabama comes into Tiger Stadium, the records are 0-0. The scoreboard says 0-0. They need to be focusing simply on the task at hand, simply on the game plan, simply on limiting Bryce Young and what he can do. They need to be focused on starting fast. They need to be focusing on what they have to do to win this game. Not what they did last year, not what they did 10 years ago, but this game. They don't need to be thinking about how Alabama's the best, the best program in the country. It's not the best team in the country right now, but historically has been the best team in the country so many years in a row. I don't want them to be thinking about that. They need to be thinking about how good they are. They need to be thinking about how they can win this game, not the past. And I'm sure the message in the locker room is very much so focusing on the game plan, focusing on themselves, and focusing how they can force turnovers, how they can use the crowd in their favor. I'm sure that is the message in the locker room. But I don't want that team thinking about, oh my gosh, this is Alabama. Oh my gosh, this is Nick Saban. Oh my gosh, this is a team that has beaten us for so many years in a row. They need to walk out of that tunnel and say, we can do this. We're a good team. This is just another game. This is just another team on our schedule. No team is more important than the other one. They don't need to be thinking about, oh my gosh, this is Alabama. So I think the mental element of this game is a really huge part of it, of just staying focused, not getting overwhelmed with kind of the big game jitters and the bright lights, to stay focused and to understand that this is a winnable game for LSU. But it can't come with mental mistakes. It can't come with penalties. They're going to have to focus on the task at hand and not let the anxiety or the excitement or the nerves get in front of them, because that's how you lose against any team, but especially a team like Alabama that I'm sure is going to be mentally ready to show up to play. Coming up next, we got some injury updates from Brian Kelly. Who will we see this weekend? Who might be out this weekend? What can we expect from the personnel on Saturday? We'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Sweatblock. So Mike, he's a Vegas resort concierge. So he is always talking to people. He's always on his feet, always making sure that the guests at the hotel that he works for has what they need. But he can't do that whenever he's constantly running to the bathroom to dry off his suit that he sweat through, that he can sweat through it in less than an hour. So just imagine that there are guests that need him. He's trying to get his job done, but he's constantly running back and forth, either changing his suit or drying off his suit, because he's so embarrassed about how much he sweats. But not anymore, thanks to Sweatblock. Mike's problem was fixed with Sweatblock. Plus, the Sweatblock wipes, They're a must-have for everyone's toiletry bag. You can throw it in your briefcase, you can throw it in your purse, whether it's a big presentation that you've been nervous about or a hot date that you've been nervous about, anything that might make you sweat a little bit, everyone can benefit from the Sweat Block wipes. So if you or someone that you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweat Block. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com, also available on Amazon. So some injury updates. Who can we expect on the field? Who might not be on the field? So Brian Kelly addressed both on Monday and Thursday in his press conferences. So who will we see? Jack Bech, expected to be a go per Brian Kelly on Saturday. He's been dealing with what Brian Kelly called kind of a nagging, annoying back injury. We saw him, was that the Florida game, muffed a punt, and then we saw him in street clothes on the bench for the rest of the game. He was out against Ole Miss, and Jack Bech even said himself, no doubt I will play against Alabama. So some much needed wide receiver depth. Jack Bech will be back out there. Another one, John Emery, who was out against Ole Miss, which we originally thought was a knee issue, but Brian Kelly clarified later on that it was an Achilles injury, which I always try and approach with caution with your Achilles. Like any soft tissue injury like that, Achilles, hamstring, I approach with an abundance of caution because you tear that Achilles and that's a devastating injury that leaves you out for the rest of the season. But John Emery will be back against Ole Miss. We heard earlier this week that he, quote unquote, plans to play. We heard from Brian Kelly that he is a go. So that's going to be huge. Adding, again, much needed running back depth. And also, I think getting John Emery back for this game specifically is going to be huge for this LSU team, not just because he's a great player, but also I'm looking at the forecast in Baton Rouge on Saturday, and it looks like 90% thunderstorm and rain and hard rain all day long. So, bad weather, that means you're going to be running the ball a lot. And adding John Emery just adds another threat in the run game. So if the rain is bad, if what they're able to do in the passing game is limited, John Emery adds to what they're able to do in the run game. I mean, this LSU running back core has proven to be outstanding all season long. And add Jaden Daniels on top of it. He's such a threat with his legs. So with the weather, with the rain, passing game might be kind of up in the air, no pun intended. But yeah, adding John Emery back, he'll be a go after being out against Ole Miss. Also, Major Burns is expected to be out. He got injured in week 4 with kind of a neck and spine injury. Another thing that's scary that I don't like to mess with, but he was cleared to play on Monday. So he will be out there against Alabama. In the secondary, this is a certified passing attack. I stand by it. I believe that Bryce Young is the best quarterback in the country. I think he proves that week in and week out. Even in their one loss in the season, I think that Bryce Young was the best player on the field against Tennessee. So they're going to need some help in the secondary. They're going to need all the help that they can get defensively to limit what this explosive Alabama offense can do. So getting Major Burns back out there is huge as well. So Jack Bech, John Emery, and Major Burns all expected to be out there, but who LSU will be missing on Saturday is Garrett Dellinger. Brian Kelly was asked about Garrett Dellinger in his Thursday press conference. He will be out. Brian Kelly said with the way that he's been progressing, just made the decision that he won't be playing. He's getting better. So progress is being made, but he's just not quite 100%. So Garrett Dellinger has been out the last 2 weeks. There was a hand issue. He's been dealing with a few nagging injuries throughout the season, but he's been out against Florida and Ole Miss. So Garrett Dellinger is a great player, and he has been a core member of this offensive line. But the reason why I'm really not terrified of Garrett Dellinger being out is what are LSU's 2 best offensive games so far this season? Florida and Ole Miss. And Garrett Dellinger was not available in either of those games. Now, I'm not saying that, Garrett Dellinger's out and all of a sudden LSU's offense pops off. That's not the case. But I think more so my point is this LSU offense can still thrive with or without Garrett Dellinger. So I'm not overly concerned about that, but good to hear that he's making progress and we can see Garrett Dellinger out there hopefully sooner rather than later. So starting fast, don't make mental mistakes. And getting 3 really great playmakers out there, I think we can feel a little bit of optimism about LSU going into this Alabama game. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Coming up on tomorrow's edition, the 3 ways LSU could lose against Alabama, but also the 3 ways that LSU can win. We'll have that on your Friday edition of Locked On LSU. But for your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. That's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.